There's a special kind of violence in the phrase "you're breaking my heart" when it comes from your mother, delivered across a dinner table full of relatives who suddenly can't meet your eyes. I was sitting there with tiramisu melting on my plate, surrounded by family at what was supposed to be a celebration, when my mother looked at me with tears in her eyes and said those 4 words that had controlled me my entire life. Not because I'd done anything wrong. I'd driven 3 hours to be there, brought her favorite dessert, called her twice that week, but because I'd dared to have a life, a career, an existence that didn't revolve entirely around managing her emotions. And in that moment, watching her perform her pain for an audience that would absolutely judge me for it, I realized something that changed everything. Her heart wasn't actually breaking. Mine was. Maybe you know that feeling, that crushing guilt that comes from your mother's tears, that suffocating sense that your independence is somehow an act of cruelty, that your success makes you a bad daughter because it means you're not available to absorb her every feeling. The toxic family gathering where emotional manipulation mother tactics get deployed like weapons, where every boundary you try to set gets reframed as abandonment, where "I love you" really means sacrifice yourself to prove it. The controlling mother who's perfected the art of making her pain your responsibility, who's taught you since childhood that her feelings matter more than your entire existence. But hey race, what 35 years of breaking myself to keep her whole finally taught me you can't actually break someone's heart by living your own life. You can disappoint them, sure. You can make them uncomfortable with your boundaries. You can refuse to play the role they've assigned you in their personal drama. But their emotional response to your autonomy? That's not heartbreak, that's manipulation dressed up in maternal clothing and tears. This is the story of how "you're breaking my heart" became the phrase that finally gave me permission to stop breaking myself. How one family gathering became the moment I chose my own wholeness over her manufactured fragility. Because the truth nobody tells you about toxic parent story dynamics is this: the daughter who constantly sacrifices herself doesn't actually have a better relationship with her mother, she just has a smaller life. The peace you get from managing someone else's emotions isn't peace at all, it's exhaustion wearing a mask. And the love that requires you to destroy yourself isn't love, it's control with a greeting card slogan attached. This is my silent revenge family story, except the revenge was simply choosing to stop participating in my own emotional demolition. It's the emotional power reversal that happens when you finally understand that boundaries aren't cruelty, that guilt isn't the same as love, and that sometimes the most radical thing a daughter can do is refuse to break herself one more time. And it started at a family gathering, with my mother's tears and my moment of devastating clarity: if loving her means destroying me, then I'm loving wrong. Or maybe, just maybe, she is. The dining room was filled with that particular warmth that only happens when family gathers, candles flickering on the table, the smell of my aunt's famous lasagna mixing with laughter from the living room where my cousins were already into their second bottle of wine. It was supposed to be a celebration, my brother's promotion, and everyone had shown up in their best casual clothes with smiles and stories to share. The family event meant to feel warm and supportive, had all the right ingredients: good food, people I'd grown up with, that sense of belonging that comes from shared history and inside jokes that go back decades. I'd even brought mom's favorite dessert, the tiramisu from that Italian bakery she loved, thinking it would make her happy. She was holding court in the kitchen when I arrived, telling my aunt about her latest book club drama, and I felt that familiar flutter of hope that maybe tonight would be easy. Maybe we could just be a normal family having a normal dinner without the undercurrent of tension that usually followed mom and me around like a shadow. The mother appears emotional and vulnerable in that way that immediately makes you want to fix whatever's wrong, and when she hugged me at the door, holding on just a beat too long, I felt myself soften. "I'm so glad you're here," she whispered, and I believed her. I wanted to believe her. I helped set the table, poured wine, made small talk with relatives I hadn't seen since Christmas. My brother gave his speech, we all toasted, and for a moment, just a moment, everything felt normal. The protagonist feels responsible for harmony in ways that daughters of controlling mothers always do, that hypervigilance where you're constantly monitoring the emotional temperature of the room, ready to smooth over conflicts or redirect conversations before they turn uncomfortable. I caught mom watching me from across the table while everyone was laughing at my uncle's terrible joke, and I smiled at her, hoping she could feel my love, my effort, my genuine desire for this evening to be good for all of us. That's when I made my mistake. I relaxed. I let my emotional guard lowered because the wine was good and the food was better and my brother was happy and for once, everything seemed okay. I didn't notice Mom getting quieter as the evening progressed. Didn't catch the way she was watching me interact with my cousins, the way her smile was getting tighter around the edges. Didn't realize she was building up to something until it was too late. Because that's how it always works with emotional manipulation mother dynamics. The storm gathers while you're distracted by sunshine, and by the time you notice the clouds, you're already soaked. It started during dessert, so casually I almost missed it. My cousin Rebecca was asking about my new job, genuinely interested in the details, and I was explaining a project I was excited about when Mom's voice cut through the conversation. "It's wonderful that your career is going so well," she said, but there was something sharp underneath the sugar coating. "I just wish you had as much time for family as you do for work." The mother frames disagreement as emotional harm before I'd even disagreed with anything, setting up the narrative that my success somehow meant I was abandoning her, that my happiness came at the cost of her pain. I tried to redirect, said something about how I'd been at every family event this year, how I called her twice a week, how I'd just driven 3 hours to be here tonight. But she wasn't listening. She was performing. Her eyes got glossy, her voice trembled just enough to make everyone else at the table uncomfortable, and then came the phrase that I'd heard 1,000 variations of my entire life: "You're breaking my heart." For words that carried the weight of 35 years of guilt, of a motherhood learned early that pain was power, that vulnerability could be weaponized, that her daughter would break herself into pieces before allowing her mother to feel broken. The guilt replaces dialogue so smoothly you barely notice the conversation has been hijacked. Suddenly we weren't talking about my job anymore, we were talking about my failures as a daughter. "I know you're busy," Mom continued, dabbing at her eyes with a napkin, "but you're all I have. Your brother has his career, his life, and I'm so proud of him. But you used to care about family. You used to put me first." The "you're breaking my heart" guilt technique was perfect. It positioned her as the victim of my choices, my independence, my refusal to center my entire existence around her emotional needs. And because it was my mother, because she looked genuinely hurt, because everyone at the table was now watching us, I felt that familiar crushing sensation in my chest. The emotional obligation imposed wasn't subtle. Every eye at that table was on me, waiting to see how I'd respond to my mother's pain, waiting to see if I'd defend myself and prove her point that I was cold, selfish, too focused on my own life, or if I'd apologize and promise to do better, to be better, to sacrifice more of myself on the altar of her feelings. My brother looked down at his plate, already knowing this pattern too well to get involved. My aunt reached over and squeezed Mom's hand sympathetically. And I sat there, fork suspended over tiramisu I'd bought specifically because she loved it, feeling the weight of her manufactured heartbreak settling on my shoulders like a coat I'd worn my entire life but never actually agreed to put on. Mom wasn't done. She never was when she had an audience. The emotional display in front of others escalated as she turned to my aunt, voice breaking. "I don't know what I did wrong. I gave her everything, sacrificed everything for my children, and now she can't even make time for a Sunday dinner once in a while. I'd been to 3 Sunday dinners in the past month, but facts didn't matter when feelings were the currency." My uncle shifted uncomfortably. Rebecca suddenly found her wine glass fascinating. The toxic family gathering atmosphere thickened as everyone became complicit in my humiliation through their silence, their discomfort making them witnesses rather than defenders. "You always do this," Mom continued, and I realized she'd switched from sad to accusatory without missing a beat. "You make plans with your friends, you prioritize work, you have time for everyone except your own mother. Do you know how that feels? To be abandoned by your own daughter?" The protagonist positioned as cruel or selfish happened so seamlessly. I'd gone from successful professional to heartless child in the span of one dessert course. My cousin Mark tried to change the subject, mentioned something about the weather, but Mom waved him off. "No, this needs to be said. She needs to hear how she's making me feel." What made it worse was that I couldn't even defend myself without proving her point. If I mentioned the calls, the visits, the constant check-ins, I'd look like I was keeping score, like love was transactional. If I pointed out that I'd driven 3 hours tonight specifically to be here, I'd sound defensive, like I was throwing my minimal effort in her face. The feelings dismissed were minor exhaustion from constantly managing her emotions, my hurt at never being enough, my frustration at having my presence and effort erased in favor of her narrative of abandonment. But in this moment, at this table, with all these eyes watching, my feelings were irrelevant. Only hers mattered. "I just want my daughter back," Mom said softly, a final devastating blow delivered with tears that looked real because maybe, in some twisted way, they were. The compliance expected hung in the air like humidity before a storm. I was supposed to apologize. Supposed to promise to do better, be better, sacrifice more. Supposed to hug her and tell her she was right, I'd been neglectful, I'd make more time, I'd put her first. Everyone at that table was waiting for me to perform the role I'd been assigned since birth, the daughter who absorbed her mother's pain, who made herself smaller so Mom could feel bigger, who broke herself into manageable pieces so no one had to deal with the controlling motherhood, learned that heartbreak was the most effective form of control she could wield. I set down my fork and did something I'd never done before in the face of my mother's tears. I just sat there. The protagonist remains calm in a way that felt almost out of body, like I was watching myself from somewhere near the ceiling, observing this familiar scene play out with sudden, startling clarity. Mom was crying, my aunt was comforting her, my uncle was looking at me with that expression that said fix this, and I just didn't. I didn't apologize. Didn't rush to reassure her. Didn't immediately start listing all the ways I'd tried to be a good daughter. I just sat there, hands folded in my lap, breathing slowly, watching. "Well?" Mom said when the silence stretched too long, when my lack of response became its own kind of statement. "Don't you have anything to say? Don't you care that you're hurting me?" And hey race where I did something even more unexpected. I spoke quietly, without emotion, without defense. "I hear that you're hurt," I said, and nothing more. No defense or justification, no explanation of my perspective, no counter-narrative to challenge hers. Just that simple acknowledgement that hung in the air like a foreign language no one at the table knew how to translate. My brother's head snapped up, surprised. Even Mom seemed momentarily thrown off her script. The quiet acceptance on the surface looked like capitulation to everyone watching, but it was something else entirely. It was refusal. Refusal to engage in the familiar dance, refusal to defend choices I didn't need to justify, refusal to perform the guilt and apology that would soothe Mom's manufactured pain. "That's it?" she said, voice rising slightly. "That's all you have to say? I tell you you're breaking my heart and you just sit there." I met her eyes with something I'd never given her before, complete, unreadable neutrality. Not anger, not guilt, not the desperate desire to make everything okay. Just calm observation. The internal observation happening behind my neutral expression was seismic. I was watching my mother use pain as a weapon, watching my family enable it through their uncomfortable silence, watching the same pattern I'd participated in for 35 years play out like a recording I'd heard so many times I could recite it by heart. But this time, I wasn't playing my assigned role. This time, I was just watching. And Mom could feel the difference, could sense that her tears weren't landing the way they usually did, that something fundamental had shifted in me even if she couldn't quite identify what. Her confusion was visible, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face before she doubled down, reaching for my hand across the table in a gesture that looked loving but felt like a leash. I drove home that night with my hands tight on the steering wheel and my mind racing through decades of similar moments. The recognition of lifelong emotional pattern wasn't new exactly. I'd known, somewhere deep down, that this wasn't normal, that other mothers didn't weaponize their pain quite like mine did. But knowing something intellectually and seeing it with perfect clarity are two different things. I pulled over at a rest stop halfway home and just sat there in the parking lot, watching the highway lights blur through tears that were finally for me instead of for her. How many times had I heard "You're breaking my heart"? How many decisions had I unmade, how many dreams had I postponed, How many pieces of myself had I sacrificed to keep her heart whole? The realization that self-sacrifice is expected hit me like cold water. Mom didn't want a daughter, she wanted an emotional support animal, a therapist, a mirror that reflected back only her feelings and never my own. Every time I'd grown, succeeded, moved forward in any direction that wasn't circling back to her, it became evidence of my cruelty, proof of my selfishness, a dagger in her perpetually breaking heart. The controlling mother dynamic had been so normalized, so consistent, so wrapped in the language of love that I'd never questioned whether love was supposed to feel this exhausting, this heavy, this much like drowning while everyone watches and calls it swimming. I thought about calling her, apologizing, smoothing it over the way I always did. My phone sat in the cup holder, dark and accusing, and I could almost script the conversation. I'd say I was sorry for hurting her, shed cry and accept my apology while reminding me of all the ways I still needed to improve, and would reset to our baseline dysfunction until the next time I dared to exist outside her orbit. But something had broken in me during that dinner, or maybe something had finally, blessedly healed. The decision to stop absorbing pain came not with drama or declaration but with simple, quiet certainty. I couldn't do this anymore. I wouldn't do this anymore. The emotional clarity replaces guilt like dawn replacing darkness, gradual, inevitable, illuminating. I wasn't a bad daughter. I wasn't cruel or selfish or heartless. I was just a person who'd spent 35 years trying to fill a hole in my mother that I didn't create and couldn't fix. This emotional manipulation mother pattern, this toxic parent story that had defined our relationship since I was old enough to understand that my happiness seemed to cause her pain, it wasn't mine to carry anymore. I started the car and drove the rest of the way home with my phone off, my heart still racing but my mind clearer than it had been in years. The silent revenge family moment wasn't revenge at all, it was just me, finally, choosing myself over the endless task of managing someone else's manufactured heartbreak. The next morning, I did something I'd never done before. I wrote down my boundaries. Not for her, but for me. A clear emotional boundary set looks deceptively simple on paper. I will not apologize for living my own life. I will not manage her emotions. I will not accept guilt for her choices to feel hurt by my independence. I will not break myself to keep her whole. Reading those words back felt like learning a new language, one where my needs actually mattered, where protecting myself wasn't betrayal. I didn't send them to her. I didn't need to. They were a contract with myself, witnessed only by the morning light filtering through my kitchen window and the coffee going cold in my favorite mug. When she called later that day, I'd known she would. I let it go to voicemail. Then the text, I can't believe you left without saying goodbye. You really don't care, do you? Before, I would have called back immediately, frantic to explain, desperate to fix it. Now I just read it, felt the familiar guilt trying to take root, and consciously chose to let it pass through me like weather. No argument, no scene, just silence where my compliance used to be. I texted back hours later, deliberately am not available for this conversation. I love you, but I'm taking space. 9 words that felt like jumping off a cliff and discovering I could fly. The withdrawal from emotional caretaking wasn't dramatic, it was just consistent. I stopped answering calls after 9 p.m. when she'd call crying about something I couldn't fix. I stopped canceling my plans every time she had a crisis that somehow only I could solve. I stopped texting back immediately, stopped showing up every time she summoned me, stopped performing the role of the daughter whose entire purpose was absorbing her mother's pain. The emotional power reversal happened quietly, in 1,000 small moments where I chose myself instead of choosing her comfort. Where I let her feelings be her responsibility instead of mine. The power shifts inward when you stop giving it away, and I felt it physically, the lightness in my chest, the way my shoulders dropped from around my ears, the space that opened up in my mind where her voice used to live rent-free. I wasn't angry at her. I wasn't even trying to teach her a lesson or punish her for years of manipulation. I was just done. Done being the emotional punching bag dressed up as devoted daughter. Done letting your breaking my heart be the phrase that shattered mine. This female empowerment story was happening in real time, in unanswered calls and shortened visits and boundaries that I maintained even when maintaining them felt harder than just giving in. The dark family drama was ending not with a bang but with my quiet, revolutionary decision to stop playing my assigned role in her perpetual victim narrative. The emotional appeals intensify when control starts slipping, and Mom's did with predictable desperation. The calls came daily, sometimes multiple times a day, each voicemail more anguished than the last. I don't understand what I did to deserve this treatment. I'm your mother. I gave you life. How can you just abandon me like this? She called my brother, who texted me Mom's really upset. Maybe just call her. She called my aunt, who called me to say Mom was devastated and maybe you're being a little hard on her. The family revenge story everyone seemed to think I was starring in wasn't revenge, it was just boundaries, but to her, my refusal to absorb her pain felt like warfare. When the tears didn't work through phone calls, she showed up at my apartment. I watched through the peephole as she stood outside my door, tissues in hand, looking small and fragile in a way that was carefully calculated. The victim narrative escalates when the usual tactics fail, and Shed added new elements. She was having health problems, vague, undiagnosed, certainly stress-related and definitely my fault. She wasn't sleeping, Shed lost weight, everyone was worried about her. Please, she said through the door. Just talk to me. You're killing me with this silence. My own daughter is killing me. The "you're breaking my heart" guilt had evolved into something more extreme, more desperate, more designed to make me crack. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. Just stood there in the doorway, arms crossed, while she cycled through her full repertoire: tears, anger, bargaining, more tears. What do you want from me? She finally asked, voice raw. What can I do to fix this? And Herace, where the confusion when guilt fails was most visible, she genuinely didn't understand that this wasn't a negotiation, wasn't a problem she could cry or manipulate her way out of. Shed spent 35 years training me to respond to her pain with my compliance, and now that I wasn't responding, she had no other tools in her kit. Just variations of the same manipulation that wasn't working anymore. I want you to stop using your pain to control me, I said quietly. I want you to let me live my life without making it about your feelings. I want you to love me without requiring that I break myself to prove it. The loss of control was written all over her face: shock, then anger, then a return to tears that looked different now, less calculated and more genuinely confused. This toxic family gathering aftermath had become something she couldn't navigate, and watching her flounder would have been satisfying if it wasn't so sad. The controlling mother who'd built her identity on her daughter's compliance was suddenly facing a daughter who'd learned that love shouldn't require self-destruction. And she had absolutely no idea what to do with that. It's been 8 months since that family gathering, and Mom and I have what you might call a relationship, just a different one than before. We talk once a week, briefly. I visit once a month, on my terms. And when she starts with "you're breaking my heart," I gently end the conversation. Not with anger, not with explanation, just with a calm "I'm going to go now. I love you." Because Herace, what those 8 months taught me: love doesn't require self-destruction, no matter how many times someone tells you it does. Real love doesn't demand that you sacrifice your peace, your boundaries, your entire sense of self to prove your devotion. That's not love, that's hostage negotiation with guilt as the weapon. The hardest lesson was understanding that pain used as control loses power the moment you stop accepting responsibility for it. Mom's heart isn't actually breaking, it's just uncomfortable with the boundaries I've set, and she's learned to call that discomfort heartbreak to make me responsible for fixing it. But her feelings aren't my emergency anymore. Her discomfort with my independence isn't proof of my cruelty. Her tears don't automatically mean I've done something wrong. This emotional manipulation mother pattern only works if the daughter keeps playing her assigned role, and I've finally, permanently, stepped off that stage. What surprised me most was the relief, not just mine, but eventually, hers too. Once she realized the tears truly didn't work anymore, once she understood that guilt wouldn't bring me back to my old patterns, she had to find new ways to relate to me. And slowly, awkwardly, she's learning. We had a conversation last month where she told me about her book club without making it about how I never have time for her interests. She asked about my work without weaponizing my success. It was brief, stilted, unfamiliar, but it was real in a way our relationship had never been when I was busy managing her emotions instead of having my own. The cycles break when you choose yourself, not with dramatic confrontations or cutting people off completely, but with the quiet, consistent refusal to participate in dynamics that destroy you. Boundaries are not cruelty. They are the foundation of any relationship worth having. The family revenge story everyone thought I was living turned out to be a female empowerment story, instead the story of a daughter who finally understood that protecting herself wasn't betraying her mother, that saying no to emotional manipulation wasn't the same as saying no to love, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to enable their worst patterns. Mom's heart isn't broken. Mine isn't either, not anymore. And that's not because I stopped caring, it's because I finally started caring about myself too. So hey, raise the question that should shake you awake tonight: how many times have you broken yourself to keep someone else's heart whole? How many dreams have you postponed, boundaries have you erased, pieces of yourself have you sacrificed because someone, maybe your mother, maybe someone else, told you that living your own life was breaking their heart? I'm not talking about normal compromise or healthy family relationships. I'm talking about that specific pattern where your independence is framed as cruelty, where your success becomes evidence of your selfishness, where someone else's inability to handle your autonomy somehow becomes your responsibility to fix by making yourself smaller. Think about the last time someone used their pain to control you. Did they cry when you set a boundary? Did they tell you that you were hurting them by prioritizing your own needs? Did they make you responsible for emotions that were never yours to manage? Hey race, what that family gathering taught me: pain can be real and still be weaponized. Tears can be genuine and still be manipulative. And love, real, healthy, sustainable love, never requires that one person destroy themselves to prove their devotion. The "you're breaking my heart" guilt only works if you accept the premise that their heart is your responsibility. It's not. It never was. This dark family drama I lived through wasn't unique to mothers and daughters. It happens in all kinds of relationships where one person has learned that emotional pain is the most effective form of control. The controlling mother, the manipulative partner, the guilt-tripping friend who makes every boundary feel like betrayal. They've all learned the same lesson: if you can make someone feel responsible for your pain, you can make them do almost anything. But hey race, what they don't tell you, that power only works as long as you keep accepting it. The moment you understand that their feelings are not your emergency, that their discomfort with your boundaries is not proof of your cruelty, the entire dynamic collapses. The toxic parent story, the emotional manipulation mother pattern, the family revenge story that everyone thinks you're living when you finally set boundaries, these narratives only have power if you keep playing your assigned role. And you don't have to. You can love someone and still refuse to be destroyed by them. You can honor your mother and still have a life that doesn't revolve around managing her emotions. You can care deeply about family and still understand that caring for yourself isn't betrayal, it's survival. Cycles break when you choose yourself, not with one dramatic moment, but with 1,000 small decisions where you prioritize your wholeness over someone else's manufactured fragility. If this story resonated with you, if you heard echoes of your own family gathering in mine, if you've been told you're breaking someone's heart just by living your life, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. These stories matter because they remind us we're not cruel for having boundaries, we're not selfish for refusing to self-destruct, and we're not bad daughters or sons or partners for understanding that love shouldn't feel like drowning. Your life is not collateral for someone else's emotional comfort. Your dreams are not negotiable to maintain someone else's sense of control. Your heart matters just as much as theirs, maybe more, because it's the only one you're actually responsible for keeping whole. The female empowerment story I'm living now isn't about triumph over my mother or revenge for years of manipulation. It's simpler and more profound than that. It's about a woman who finally learned that protecting herself isn't cruelty, that boundaries are love in its most honest form, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop breaking yourself to keep someone else comfortable. My mother's heart isn't broken. Mine isn't either, not anymore. And if someone in your life is telling you that your autonomy is breaking their heart, maybe it's time to ask yourself, whose heart are you really responsible for? Because I promise you, it's not theirs. It's yours. And it's been waiting for you to choose it for far too long.